The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, then heavier, until the streets of the small coastal town glistened like mirrors under the streetlights. The air was damp and smelled faintly of salt from the ocean nearby. Most shops had closed early, their windows dark, and only the faint hum of the late-night buses broke the silence. Ana de Armas stood under a narrow shop awning, clutching her phone in one hand and her small travel bag in the other. She checked the screen again. No new messages. The ride she had booked was still 5 minutes away, the same as it had said 20 minutes earlier. Her chest tightened. The last ferry of the night would leave in less than 40 minutes, and if she missed it, she would miss the meeting that could change her entire future. Her mind replayed the email she had received 3 days ago. It wasn't just an invitation. It was an opportunity. The kind that doesn't come twice. A chance to read for a role in a film she had dreamed of doing for years. The director was only in town for one night, and if she couldn't make it, the role would go to someone else without a second thought. She bit her lip and glanced down the empty road. The rain had soaked the cuffs of her jeans and was slowly seeping into her shoes. A voice came from behind her. "You look like you're trying to get somewhere fast." She turned, startled. Standing a few feet away, under the dim yellow glow of the shop's flickering sign, was Keanu Reeves. He wore a simple dark jacket, his hair damp from the rain. He looked calm, but his eyes were sharp, like he had already noticed everything about the situation.
Yes,
Anna stammered.
I need to get to the harbor before the last ferry leaves."
She hesitated, unsure if she should say more, but the words tumbled out anyway.
"If I miss it, I miss something important."
Keanu nodded slowly. "No taxis?"
"Booked one,"
she said, showing him the app.
"but it's stuck somewhere. Traffic, maybe.
Or they just forgot." Keanu glanced at his watch, then at the empty road. "You don't have 40 minutes. You have 25 if you want to be safe." His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. She tried to smile. "I guess I'm not going to make it then." But Keanu shook his head. "You will." He stepped forward, pulling a motorcycle helmet from a black bag slung over his shoulder. "Come on, I'll take you." Anna blinked.
"You ride?"
"I do," he said simply, handing her the helmet. "And right now, you don't have time to decide if you trust me. You just have to." There was no arrogance in his voice, only quiet certainty. She stared at him for a moment, trying to read his face. The rain slid down his jacket, the streetlight catching in the drops. In another situation, she might have refused, but the clock in her head was ticking louder than the rain. She took the helmet, the cold plastic slick in her hands.
"Okay,"
she whispered. Within minutes, they were weaving through the narrow streets, the motorcycle's engine low and steady beneath them. The rain stung her cheeks, the wind pulling at her hair under the helmet. She clung to the side handles at first. Then, as the road curved sharply, instinct made her grip his jacket instead. Keanu rode with precision, never reckless, but always fast enough to shave seconds off the journey. He seemed to know every shortcut, every back alley, every turn where he could avoid the sluggish evening traffic. As they sped past a row of darkened shops, Anna felt something shift inside her. She didn't know him. Not really. But the way he moved, the way he focused entirely on getting her there, it felt like he understood the weight of this night without her needing to explain it. Halfway to the harbor, they were forced to stop. A delivery truck had stalled in the middle of a narrow street, blocking the way. Rain pooled under its tires. The driver was waving his arms helplessly, trying to direct cars back. Anna's heart sank.
"We'll lose too much time,"
she said, her voice rising in panic. Keanu's eyes swept the alleyways on either side, calculating. "Hold on," he said, turning the bike sharply down a side path so narrow she could feel her knees brush the walls. They emerged onto a cobblestone lane that led straight downhill. The harbor lights flickered faintly in the distance. Anna tightened her grip on his jacket. "How did you even know this way?" "You learn the city if you take the time to walk it," he said simply, leaning into another turn. By the time they reached the edge of the harbor, the air smelled thick with sea salt and diesel. Keanu braked sharply, pulling up near the ferry gate. The last few passengers were boarding, and the crew was preparing to pull the ramp. "Go," he said, removing his helmet and handing it to her. "Run. Don't look back." She froze for half a second. "What about you?" "I was..." She hesitated, then nodded and ran, her shoes slapping against the wet planks. As she reached the ramp, she turned back just once. Keanu was still there, standing in the rain, watching to make sure she made it aboard. As the ferry horn echoed through the harbor, Anna realized something. She might never have made it if he hadn't appeared when he did, and she didn't even know why he had been there in the first place. That question stayed with her long after the boat pulled away from shore. The ferry's engines hummed steadily beneath Anna's feet as she stood near the railing, rain still dripping from her hair. The harbor lights grew smaller with every passing minute, swallowed by the mist that hung low over the water. She kept replaying the last 10 minutes in her head, the sharp turns through narrow streets, the sound of the rain against the helmet, the moment she ran up the ramp just before it lifted. But more than anything, she thought about him. Keanu Reeves. It wasn't like she hadn't heard the name before, almost everyone had. But nothing about the way he acted tonight matched the image she had in her mind. There had been no grand introduction, no hint of his fame, no need for her to feel small in his presence. He had just helped. No questions asked. The ferry rocked gently, but inside, Anna felt restless. She pulled out her phone, almost without thinking, and tried to search for any local news or events that might explain why he was in this little coastal town on a rainy night. Nothing. No headlines. No sightings. The only thing she had was a name and a memory of a man standing in the rain, letting her board a ferry that wasn't his. When the ferry docked at the other side, she hurried off. The meeting place was just a short walk from the terminal, an old building with tall windows glowing warmly against the stormy night. She hesitated before pushing the door open, trying to catch her breath and hide the fact that she'd nearly missed it. Inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee and fresh wood polish. A small group of people were already seated, talking quietly. At the far end of the table sat the director, flipping through a stack of papers. His eyes lifted when he saw her, and a faint smile touched his lips. "Ana de Armas," he said, pronouncing her name perfectly. "I'm glad you made it. I was told the storm might keep people away." She smiled, still a little out of breath. "It almost did." The evening moved quickly after that. She read lines, discussed scenes, answered questions about her vision for the role. The director was thoughtful, attentive, and sometimes surprisingly quiet, studying her in a way that felt more like he was trying to see the person behind the performance. By the end, he thanked her warmly, but gave no clear sign of whether she had secured the role. She had been in this industry long enough to know that no sign was not necessarily a bad one. Still, as she stepped out into the rain again, she felt a rush of gratitude, not only for making it to the meeting, but for the strange twist of fate that had put her on that motorcycle. She started walking toward the small inn where she had booked a room for the night. The streets were mostly empty, except for the occasional car splashing through puddles. But halfway down the block, she stopped. There, leaning casually against a lamppost, was Keanu. His jacket was still damp, but his hair had dried slightly, curling faintly at the edges. He straightened when he saw her. "You made it," he said simply. She blinked in surprise. "You waited?" "Figured you might not have an umbrella," he said, glancing at the rain. "And it's a long walk to that little inn you booked." She frowned, half amused, half curious. "How do you know where I'm staying?" He smiled faintly. Small town, people talk, and I might have asked the ferry attendant. There was no edge to his voice, no sense that he had crossed a line. It was simply matter of fact, but she still tilted her head.
Why? Why would you do all this?
Keanu's expression didn't change, but his voice was quieter now. Because I've missed things before. Things I shouldn't have. And I know how it feels to wish someone had helped when it mattered. She looked at him for a long moment. The rain softened around them, drops catching in the lamplight like tiny sparks. Come on, he said finally, gesturing down the street. Let's get you inside before you freeze. They walked together in silence, their footsteps splashing in rhythm. She noticed that he didn't walk ahead or behind, always at her side, like he was making sure she was steady on the wet pavement. At the inn, she turned to face him. Thank you. Not just for the ride, but for staying. He gave a small nod, then glanced at the door. Rest well. You've got a big day tomorrow. And with that, he stepped back into. As she stood there, watching him disappear, one thought kept circling in her mind. Keanu Reeves didn't seem like the kind of man who appeared in someone's life without reason. And something told her this wasn't the last time she would see him. The next morning, the storm had not lifted. Rain fell in slow, steady sheets, turning the streets into shallow streams. Anna stood at the window of her small inn room, watching people hurry past with umbrellas tilted against the wind. She had barely slept. The events of the previous night kept replaying in her mind. The ride, the narrow alleys, the moment she turned back on the ferry ramp and saw him still standing there. She told herself that meeting Keanu twice in such a short time was a coincidence. People cross paths, then move on. But deep down, she felt something else, a quiet sense that their paths were meant to cross again. Her phone buzzed. It was a short message from the director's assistant. Thank you for coming last night. The director would like to meet you again today at noon. Her heart leapt. A second meeting meant she was still in consideration. She quickly got ready, pulling on a soft sweater and a warm coat. When she stepped outside, the cold air bit at her cheeks. The walk to the meeting place would take 20 minutes. She was halfway there when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Morning, Anna. She turned. Keanu was there, as if the rain had decided to form him from its mist. He had a paper coffee cup in each hand, steam curling from the lids. How are you here again? She asked, half laughing. Small town, he said with a faint smile, handing her one of the cups. Also, you forgot your scarf last night. The innkeeper told me. She accepted the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. You didn't have to bring it. Maybe not, he said, pulling the scarf from his jacket pocket. But I said I would make sure you didn't miss anything important. I meant it. Her breath caught. There was something steady about the way he spoke, like he didn't make promises lightly. They walked together again, the rain pattering softly on their coats. She noticed that he wasn't in a rush, yet they moved quickly, almost without thinking, falling into the same pace. When they reached the building, she paused at the steps. Will you wait again? If you want me to, he said. I do. She smiled before slipping inside. The second meeting was more intense. The director asked her to read new scenes, ones filled with heavy emotion. There was a moment when she had to deliver a line so raw it made her throat tighten. She pushed through it, drawing on the memory of the ride the night before, the urgency, the rain, the stranger who decided her goal mattered enough to fight for. When it ended, the director nodded slowly. You carry truth in your voice, Anna. That is rare. Her hands trembled slightly as she thanked him and stepped back outside. And there he was, still waiting. Leaning against the railing, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hood. How was it? He asked. intense, she admitted. But good. He studied her face for a moment, then gave a small nod. Then it was worth the wait. They walked in silence until she finally asked, "You said last night that you've missed things before. What did you mean?" He didn't answer right away. The sound of the rain filled the gap. Then, quietly, he said, "There was someone I cared about. I thought I had more time. I thought they'd wait. But time doesn't wait. And neither do chances." She glanced at him, but his eyes were on the wet pavement ahead. She wanted to ask more, but something in his tone told her it wasn't the moment. When they reached the inn, he handed her the empty coffee cup she had been carrying. "Tomorrow," he said. "You'll know if you got the part." She blinked. "How do you know that?" He just smiled faintly, stepping back into the rain again. "Small town. People talk." And then, like before, he was gone, leaving her with more questions than answers. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the storm, Anna realized something. The rain had finally stopped by morning, leaving the streets smelling of salt and wet stone. Sunlight broke through in soft streaks, catching on the puddles and turning them into patches of gold. Anna sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her hands, her heart beating faster than it should for this early hour. She had been told she would hear back today. One call, one answer. Her phone rang just after 10. She snatched it up. "Hello?" "Anna." The director's voice came through, warm but unreadable. "I'll keep this simple. You have the role. Congratulations." Her breath caught, and she pressed her free hand over her mouth to keep from letting out a sound that would make her seem less professional than she wanted to be. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "You earned it," he said. "Rehearsals start in 3 weeks. We'll be in touch." The call ended, leaving her in the quiet room with her pulse still racing. She had done it. She had almost missed the chance, but she hadn't. And she knew, deep in her bones, that it wasn't just her determination that had gotten her here. She pulled on her coat and stepped outside, the crisp air filling her lungs. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but her feet seemed to decide for her. She ended up near the harbor, where the smell of the sea was sharp and alive. And there he was. Again. Keanu stood near the edge of the dock, hands in his jacket pockets, gazing out over the water. He looked like someone who belonged there, like the sea itself had called him. "You're getting good at appearing when I least expect you," Anna said, walking toward him. He turned, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And you're getting good at showing up right when I hoped you would." She laughed softly. "I got the part." His smile deepened. "I knew you would." "You keep saying that," she said, leaning on the wooden railing beside him. "Like you knew the outcome before it happened." "Some things," he said quietly, "you can just see. The way someone carries themselves, the way they don't let the weather or traffic or life get in the way of where they need to be." "I almost didn't make it, remember?" she said. "You did make it," he replied. "That's what matters." They stood there for a while, the sound of gulls and the gentle lapping of the waves between them. Then Anna asked the question that had been in her mind since that first night. "Why were you there? That night, under the awning? Why that street at that time?" He was silent for a long moment, then said, "Because someone told me once, if you can stop someone from losing what matters to them, do it." He glanced at her. "I take that seriously." She studied his face, wondering how many moments in his life had been shaped by that belief. Before she could speak, he straightened. "You should celebrate. There's a little cafe near the lighthouse. They have the best coffee in town." She smiled. "Is this your way of saying you'll buy me a coffee?" "It's my way of saying I'll walk with you," he said. And so they did. The path to the lighthouse wound along the shore, waves breaking gently against the rocks. They talked about small things, movies they loved, places they'd traveled, the strange comfort of quiet mornings. At the cafe, the owner greeted Keanu like an old friend, and they took a table by the window. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, and for a moment, everything felt simple. But as they talked, Anna noticed something in his eyes. A shadow. Like he was thinking about something far away, something that pulled at him even as he sat there smiling. She didn't push, but she knew this. Whatever He next few days blurred into a rhythm of small-town mornings and quiet conversations. Anna stayed longer than planned, telling herself she was just taking a break before her new role began. But she knew the truth. Part of her didn't want to leave because it meant not seeing him. Keanu always seemed to appear without warning. Sometimes on the harbor walk, sometimes outside the cafe, once even leaning against the rail of the ferry dock as if he'd been there for hours. They talked about everything and nothing. Films, music, the best way to cook pasta, the smell of rain before a storm. But there were things they didn't talk about. The gaps in his sentences, the way he sometimes looked out toward the horizon as if it might answer a question only he knew. One late afternoon, the sky had turned a muted gold, the sea calm and still. They sat on a weathered bench near the lighthouse, the sound of the waves a steady hum behind them. "You're leaving soon," Keanu said, not looking at her. "I have to," she replied softly. "Rehearsals start in 3 weeks." "And you'll be gone for months," he said. "Yes." There was a pause. "You'll be good in it," he said finally. "But it'll take everything out of you." She turned to him. "How do you know?" He gave a faint smile. "Because the best things always do." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. Anna hesitated, then asked the question she had been holding back. "Keanu, you told me once you missed something important before. Someone you cared about. Was it someone you loved?" He was quiet for a long time, his hands resting loosely in his lap. Finally he said, "Yes." She waited, sensing there was more. "We were supposed to meet," he continued. "One last time before she left. But I got caught up in something else, told myself there'd be another chance. There wasn't. She was gone, and I never saw her again." Anna's chest tightened. "And you've been carrying that ever since." He nodded slightly. "So now, if I can help someone make it to their moment, I do, no matter what." Her voice was gentle. "And you think that's why we met?" He finally looked at her. "I don't think it. I know it." The sun was slipping lower, casting a warm light across his face. Anna wanted to tell him that maybe this was more than just timing, more than just a promise he made to himself, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "Then maybe it's not just my moment you're helping." His expression shifted, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he stood, offering his hand to her. "Come on. The tide's low. There's a path along the rocks you need to see." They walked together, the sound of the water splashing against the stones. At one point, the path narrowed, and she had to take his hand to steady herself. His grip was warm, steady, like the promise he had made without saying it aloud. As they reached the end of the path, the horizon opened before them. The sea stretched endlessly, the fading light painting it in shades of silver and blue. Anna stood there, feeling the quiet between them grow deeper. She didn't know if this was a beginning or an ending, but she knew one thing. Whatever this connection was, it was. The morning of her departure came too soon. The air was sharp with the scent of the sea, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries cutting through the stillness. Anna stood by the harbor with her suitcase beside her, the ferry dock creaking under the weight of the waiting crowd. She had told herself she would leave quietly. No drawn-out goodbyes, no lingering. But part of her kept scanning the street, listening for footsteps she knew too well by now. And then, he was there. Keanu walked toward her, hands in his jacket pockets, the same calm in his stride that had been there from the first night. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to miss it," she replied. He gave the smallest smile. "Good. Neither did I." They stood there for a moment, the sound of the waves and the soft murmur of passengers filling the space between them. "So this is it," she said quietly. "For now," he replied. "The world's not that big. Paths cross again." She wanted to believe that, but she also knew how easily people could drift apart, even with the best intentions. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching. "For that night. For everything." He shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. You were meant to be there. I just made sure the rain didn't stop you." "But you did more than that," she said. "You reminded me that there are people who care enough to show up when it matters." His eyes softened, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw the weight he carried lift just slightly. The ferry horn sounded, a long, low call that seemed to pull at her chest. Passengers began to move toward the ramp. Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Whatever this role becomes, whatever comes after, don't let the noise make you forget why you wanted it in the first place." She nodded, memorizing the tone of his voice, the way the light caught in his eyes. "I won't." She took a step toward the ramp, but something made her turn back. "Will you be there?" she asked. "If our paths cross again?" He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there before you know you need me." She smiled, then turned and walked up the ramp. The deck was high enough that she could see him clearly as the ferry pulled away. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there, watching, making sure she was safely on her way. As the distance grew, the town blurred into a line against the horizon, but she kept her eyes on the spot where he stood until she couldn't see him anymore. Anna leaned against the railing, the wind cool on her face. She had her role, her future, her next chapter. But she also carried something else now, an unshakable certainty that sometimes the people who change your life aren't the ones who stay forever. Sometimes they're the ones who arrive in the rain, keep a promise you didn't know you needed, and leave you stronger than they found you. And she knew, deep down, that his promise wasn't